Asterisk, a broke janitor, mocked for his tattered clothes and dead-end job, suddenly inherits a rotting, worthless house. His family laughed. His friends pitied him. But when he stepped inside, he uncovered a secret that would change his life forever. This is the unbelievable story of how a man with nothing became worth $200 million and proved everyone wrong. Asterisk, before we dive into this incredible journey, make sure to subscribe, hit that like button, and turn on notifications. Stories like this remind us that miracles can happen when we least expect them. The last laugh. The fluorescent lights of Rustboro High School buzzed overhead, flickering like the last stubborn embers of a dying fire. Carlos Mendez, a 42-year-old janitor with calloused hands and a spine that ached from years of bending over mops and buckets, wiped his forehead with the back of his sleeve. The scent of bleach and stale cafeteria food clung to his worn-out work shirt. Outside, the autumn wind howled through the cracked windows of the aging school, a bitter reminder of the coming winter, and the fact that his landlord had given him until the end of the month to come up with back rent. His wife, Maria, had been sick for months, her medical bills piling up like unpaid debts. Their tiny apartment was littered with overdue notices, each one a fresh weight on his shoulders. "Hey, Mendez," called out Dave, one of the younger custodians, tossing a crumpled soda can into the trash. "You look like you've seen a ghost. What's eating you?" Carlos forced a tired smile. "Just another day in paradise," he muttered, pushing the mop across the scuffed linoleum floor. Dave chuckled, but there was no real humor in it. "Man, I don't know how you do it. 2 jobs, a sick wife. I'd have cracked by now." Carlos didn't answer. He didn't need to. Everyone in Rustboro knew his story. The guy who couldn't catch a break, the hard worker who kept getting knocked down. Even the teachers sometimes left spare change in their desks for him, their pity disguised as forgetfulness. As he emptied the last trash bin of the night, the school secretary, Mrs. Langley, hurried over, her heels clicking against the floor. "Carlos, this came for you," she said, holding out a thick cream-colored envelope. Carlos frowned. He never got mail at work. The envelope was heavy, the paper expensive. His name was printed in crisp black ink, followed by the words Law Offices of Henderson and Graves. His stomach tightened. Lawyers didn't send good news to men like him. With trembling fingers, he tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the words typed in formal, unfeeling font. "Dear Mr. Mendez, we regret to inform you of the passing of your uncle, Hector Valdez. In accordance with his last will and testament, you've been named the sole beneficiary of his estate, including all property and possessions. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to arrange the transfer of deeds." Carlos blinked. Uncle Hector? He hadn't seen the man in over 20 years. A recluse, a loner, the black sheep of the family who'd vanished into hills outside town. What kind of estate could he possibly have left? When he called the lawyer the next morning, the man's voice was clipped and professional. "The property is located at 47 Mill Road. Well, you'll see for yourself." Carlos drove his beat-up pickup truck through the winding back roads of Rustboro, past rusted-out factories and abandoned storefronts. The town had been dying for years, and the further he went, the more it felt like driving into a ghost story. Finally, he reached the address. His heart sank. The house was a sagging, weather-beaten shack. Its roof caved in, its porch rotted through. Weeds choked the yard, and the front door hung crookedly on its hinges. A gust of wind made the whole structure groan like a dying animal. Carlos stepped out his truck, his boots crunching on broken glass. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, some smirking, others shaking their heads. "That's the big inheritance?" one of them muttered, loud enough for Carlos to hear. Hector always was a crazy old coot. Carlos ignored them. He had nothing left to lose. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the creaking door and stepped into the darkness. The air inside was thick with dust and decay. His flashlight flickered as he swept it across the room, revealing peeling wallpaper, collapsed furniture, and piles of yellowed newspapers. Then his beam caught something strange. A section of the floorboards near the fireplace looked different, less warped, less rotted. Kneeling, he ran his fingers along the edge. There was a slight gap. His pulse quickened. With a grunt, He pried up the loose board, and his breath caught in his throat. Beneath it lay a small, rusted metal box, and inside that box was a single, folded piece of paper. Carlos unfolded it carefully, his hands shaking. It was a map, and at the bottom, scrawled in his uncle's messy handwriting, were 3 words: "Follow the money." Beneath the rot, the flashlight trembled in Carlos's grip as he stared at the map. The paper was brittle with age, the edges frayed, but the ink was still dark enough to see. A rough sketch of the property, with crooked lines marking the house, a gnarled oak tree near the back, and a large X dug into the dirt beside it. Carlos's pulse hammered his ears. Follow the money. Was this some kind of joke? His uncle had always been eccentric, the kind of man who muttered about government conspiracies and buried gold. The family had written him off as a harmless crank. But now, standing in the ruins of Hector's life, Carlos couldn't shake the feeling that there was something here, something real. He shoved the map into his pocket and stumbled back outside, the afternoon sun glaring down on the overgrown yard. The neighbors had lost interest, their curiosity satisfied by the sight of the broke janitor poking around a dump. Good. He didn't need an audience. The oak tree was easy to spot. It was the only thing on the property that still looked alive. Its thick roots twisted out of the ground like the fingers of a buried giant. Carlos knelt beside the spot marked on the map, his fingers digging into the damp earth. For a long moment, nothing, just dirt and worms and the ache in his knees. Then, clink, his heart leapt. He clawed at the soil, his nails scraping against something solid. A few more frantic scoops, and there it was, a metal lockbox, crusted with rust but still intact. Carlos hauled it out, his muscles straining. The box was heavier than he expected. He wiped away the grime with his sleeve, revealing an old combination lock. Damn it! He shook the box, listening for a rattle. Something was inside. Something solid. He glanced around, then grabbed a loose brick from the crumbled remains of a garden wall. 3 hard strikes later, the lock gave way with a screech of protest. The hinges groaned as he pried open the lid. Inside, nestled in a bed of moth-eaten cloth, were 3 things. A stack of old coins, dull with tarnish but unmistakably gold. A yellow deed, the paper crisp but legible. A faded photograph. Carlos picked up the coins first, turning them over in his palm. They were heavier than modern money, stamped with dates from the late 1800s. Even in the dim light, he could make out the eagle insignia. Gold dollars. His throat went dry. These weren't just collectibles. They were real currency, and from the looks of it, rare. Then came the deed. His hands shook as he unfolded it. The legal jargon was dense, but one line jumped out at him. 1212 acres of land, bordered by Mill Road to the east and Black Creek to the west. Hereby transferred to Hector Valdez, in perpetuity. Carlos's breath caught. 12 acres? The shack sat on maybe a quarter of that. The rest of the land, the valuable part, was overgrown scrub brush the county had claimed as public property years ago. But if this deed was legit, he grabbed the photograph last. It was black and white, curled at the edges. A younger Hector stood beside a gleaming 1957 Chevrolet Corvette, one hand resting on the hood like a proud parent. Behind them, a sign read, Valdez Auto Salvage. Carlos's mind raced. He'd heard stories about his uncle's failed junkyard, but no one ever mentioned a Corvette. Those cars were worth a fortune now. Had Hector hidden it somewhere? A sharp crack echoed from the trees. Carlos froze. Someone was out there. He stuffed the coins, deed, and photo back into box and shoved it under his jacket. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves like whispering voices. Another sound. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Carlos ducked behind the oak, his heart pounding. He wasn't alone. A shadow moved at the edge of the property. A man in a dark coat, watching, waiting. Carlos held his breath. Had they seen him? Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the figure turned and melted into the trees. Carlos didn't wait to find out who it was. He sprinted for his truck, the lockbox clutched tight against his chest. He had to get out of here. And he had to find out what the hell his uncle had really left behind. The secret in the attic. The tires of Carlos's pickup kicked up gravel as he sped away from the rotting house, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The lockbox sat heavy on the passenger seat, its contents burning a hole in his mind. Gold coins, a deed to land he didn't know existed. And that photograph, what did it mean? His tiny apartment smelled of stale coffee and medicine when he burst through the door. Maria was asleep on the couch, her breathing shallow but steady. The sight of her, curled under a thin blanket with a half-empty bottle of pills on the side table, made his chest tighten. He quietly set the lockbox on their rickety kitchen table and began examining his finds under the flickering overhead light. The coins came first. He rubbed one between his fingers, the tarnished gold warming to his touch. A quick search on his cracked smartphone confirmed his suspicion. These were Liberty Head gold dollars, minted between 1849 and 1889. Even in poor condition, collectors paid thousands for a single coin, and he had dozens. Then came the deed. He spread it carefully across the table, smoothing the brittle edges. The document was old but official, stamped with county seals and signed in faded ink. It clearly showed 12 acres of land, far more than the tiny plot the shack sat on. But what made his hands tremble was the small notation near the property lines. Mineral rights included. Carlos nearly dropped the paper. If the mineral rights hadn't been severed, that meant whatever lay beneath that land, oil, gas, anything, still belonged to property owner. And if the county had wrongly claimed part Hector's land as public property. A soft groan came from the couch. Maria stirred, her dark eyes fluttering open. "Carlos," she murmured, "you're home late." He hurried to her side, kneeling beside the couch. "I found something," he whispered, unable to contain the excitement in his voice. He showed her the coins, the deed. Her tired eyes widened as he explained. "Dios mio," she breathed, touching the edge of the ancient document. This would change everything. Carlos nodded, but his smile faded as he remembered the shadowy figure in the trees. "We need to be careful. Someone was watching me out there." Maria gripped his hand. "Then we move fast. Tomorrow, you take these to a lawyer. A real one." The next morning, Carlos sat across from attorney Daniel Reyes, a sharp-eyed real estate specialist whose office smelled of leather and money. The man examined the deed with a practiced eye, then pulled up county records on his computer. After 10 agonizing minutes of typing and scrolling, Reyes leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Mendez, this appears to be completely legitimate. More importantly," he tapped the screen, "the county's claim on part of this land was never properly filed. Those mineral rights are absolutely yours." Carlos's mouth went dry. "What's that mean exactly?" Reyes smiled. "It means if there's anything valuable under that land, oil, gas, even water rights, it belongs to you, and given where this property sits." He turned the monitor to show Carlos a geological survey map. "You're sitting on part of the Rustboro Shale Formation." The name meant nothing to Carlos, but the way Reyes said it made his pulse jump. "That's one of the most productive oil-bearing formations in the state." The lawyer continued, "If your land has even a fraction of that." A loud knock at the office door cut him off. Reyes frowned. "I'm in a consultation." The door swung open before he could finish. A tall man in an expensive suit stood there, his smile not reaching his cold gray eyes. Behind him loomed a broad-shouldered man with the unmistakable bearing of a bodyguard. "Daniel," the suited man said smoothly, "we need to talk about the Valdez property." Carlos's blood ran cold. The man's gaze slid to him. "Ah, you must be Hector's nephew." "I'm Robert Vance. Vance Energy." He extended a hand. "I think we have some business to discuss." The wolf at the door. The air in the lawyer's office turned thick enough to choke on. Carlos kept his hands on the deed, his fingers pressing into the aged paper as if it might vanish. Robert Vance's polished shoes clicked across the hardwood floor as he entered without invitation, his bodyguard lingering in the doorway like a sentry. Attorney Reyes stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. "Mr. Vance, this is highly inappropriate." Vance waved him off with a gloved hand. "Now, Daniel, no need for formalities." His smile was all teeth, the kind a wolf gives before the kill. I just heard the most fascinating rumor that Hector Valdez's heir had surfaced. Imagine my surprise to find him sitting in your office. Carlos's throat tightened. How did you know I was here? Vance chuckled, adjusting his cufflinks. Rustboro's a small town, Mr. Mendez. News travels fast, especially when it concerns my interests. He leaned against Reyes' desk, invading Carlos's space with the ease of a man used to owning every room he entered. You see, your uncle's land sits right in the middle of a very valuable energy corridor. My company has been acquiring surrounding parcels for some time. Reyes stepped between them. My client has only just inherited this property. Any discussions? Our best had now, Vance interrupted, his gaze never leaving Carlos. Before costly legal battles, eat into what little money you have. He pulled a checkbook from his breast pocket. Name your price. The casual arrogance of it made Carlos's hands curl into fists. This man had known about Hector's land, had probably waited years for the old recluse to die, so he could swoop in. And now here he was, treating Carlos like some desperate fool who'd roll over for a quick payout. Carlos stood slowly, meeting Vance eye to eye for the first time. Not for sale. Vance's smile didn't falter, but something dark flickered behind his gaze. Everything's for sale, Mr. Mendez, especially when the alternative is watching your wife's medical bills bury you alive. The words hit like a sucker punch. How the hell did he know about Maria? Reyes stepped forward. That's enough. My client isn't making any decisions today. Vance sighed dramatically, tucking the checkbook away. Pity? He dropped a business card on the desk. When reality sets in, and it will call me, the offer decreases every day you wait. The bodyguard opened the door, but Vance paused on the threshold. Oh, and Carlos? That shack of yours isn't safe. All sorts of accidents happen to vacant properties. The door clicked shut behind them. Silence hung heavy in the office. Reyes exhaled sharply. We need to file an injunction immediately. If Vance Energy has been eyeing that land. Carlos wasn't listening. His mind raced with terrifying clarity. The figure watching him at the property. The way Vance knew about Maria. This wasn't just business. This was a threat. He grabbed the deed and coins, shoving them into his jacket. I need to get home. The apartment was empty when he arrived. No Maria. No note. Carlos's pulse spiked. He fumbled for his phone, dialing her number with shaking fingers. It rang and rang. Then a crash from the bedroom. He moved on instinct, grabbing the baseball bat leaning by the door. The bedroom door stood slightly ajar. Carlos kicked it open, bat raised. Maria gasped from where she knelt beside an overturned dresser, her hands full of scattered papers. Carlos, you scare me, have to. He dropped the bat, pulling her into a crushing hug. Why didn't you answer your phone? She held up a dusty shoebox. I found your uncle's old bills in the closet. Look. Inside were decades of unpaid property tax notices, and one unopened letter from the State Geological Survey. Carlos tore it open. The words blurred before his eyes. Preliminary core samples indicate your property contains an estimated 2.1 million barrels of recoverable shale oil. Maria gripped his arm. Carlos, that's enough to make Vance Energy's threats make sense, he finished grimly. Outside, a car engine rumbled to life across the street. Too familiar. The same black sedan from the lawyer's office. Carlos pulled Maria away from the window. They weren't just fighting for wealth anymore. They were fighting for their lives. Blood and oil. The black sedan idled outside for 23 agonizing minutes before finally driving away. Carlos counted every second, his back pressed against the wall beside their apartment's grimy window, the baseball bat slick in his sweaty palms. Maria sat rigid at the kitchen table, her fingers tracing the Geological Survey report over and over as if the numbers might change. 2.1 million barrels. Even at today's prices, that was enough to make them wealthy beyond imagination. Enough to pay every medical bill. Enough to leave Rustboro forever. Enough to get them killed. Maria finally broke the silence. We can't stay here. Her voice was steady, but Carlos saw the tremor in her hands. He nodded, already moving. They packed in frantic silence, medications, documents, the lockbox. Carlos paused when he saw Maria tuck Hector's photograph between the pages of a book. The Corvette gleamed in the black and white image, a ghost from another life. "Where do we go?" Maria whispered as they crept down the apartment's back stairs. Carlos gripped the car keys tighter. Somewhere public. Somewhere with cameras. The Rustboro Public Library was nearly empty at midday. They claimed a corner computer station, surrounded by shelves of dusty legal texts. Carlos watched the parking lot through the window, while Maria researched mineral rights lawsuits. "Here," she murmured, pointing at the screen. "A recent case where a small landowner beat Vance Energy in court. They used this firm in Houston. Specializes in fighting corporate land grabs." Carlos noted the number, but his attention snagged on another headline. Vance Energy accused of coercion in eminent domain cases. The article described aggressive acquisition tactics, missing paperwork, sudden tax liens, and one suspicious fire on a holdout property. The computer screen blurred as exhaustion hit him. How could he fight this? He was a janitor with a high school diploma, not some Carlos. Maria's nails dug into his wrist. On the screen was a satellite map of Hector's property. She zoomed in on the eastern border. That's not scrubland. The image showed faint but unmistakable rectangular outlines beneath the overgrowth, foundations, dozens of them. Maria pulled up an archived newspaper clipping from 1972. Valdez Auto Salvage closes after fire. The accompanying photo showed a much younger Hector standing amid rows of classic cars, the same Corvette front and center. His junkyard, Carlos realized. It wasn't just that one car. He had hundreds. Classic cars that would be worth fortunes today. Buried on land Vance Energy wanted to frack. A librarian cleared her throat behind them, closing in 15 minutes. They waited until the parking lot emptied before leaving. The summer air hung thick with humidity as they approached Carlos's truck. A shadow moved in the bed. Carlos shoved Maria behind him just as a man stood up, backlit by the dying sun. Not Vance's bodyguard. This man was older, his face leathery and unshaven, wearing oil-stained coveralls. "Knew you'd come here," the stranger rasped. "Hector said you were smart." Carlos raised a bat. "Who the hell are you?" The man spat tobacco onto the pavement. "Earl Jenkins. Worked for your uncle 20 years. He jerked his chin toward Maria. "She looks like her aunt. Hector's sister." Maria gasped. "You knew my family?" Earl's grin revealed missing teeth. "Knew enough to watch that shack after he died. Saw you digging up his treasures." His expression darkened. "Saw Vance's boys watching too." Carlos lowered the bat slightly. "What do you want?" "To show you what your uncle really left you." Earl tossed a rusted key at Carlos's feet. "Meet me at the salvage yard at midnight. Come alone if you want to live." Then he was gone, vanishing into the alley shadows. The key burned in Carlos's palm. Maria pressed against his side. "It's a trap." Carlos stared at the faded number stamped on the metal, 47. Same as the address. "No," he murmured. "It's the answer." Somewhere in the darkness, an engine roared to life. They were out of time. Ghosts of the junkyard. Midnight in Rustboro smelled of diesel and damp earth. Carlos left Maria hidden in a motel room 20 miles away. The Geological Survey report and deed locked in the safe beneath a Bible she'd insisted on taking. The key to room 47 burned in his pocket as he drove toward the salvage yard with Earl Jenkins' warning ringing in his ears. "Come alone if you want to live." The moon hung low and heavy over the tree line as Carlos turned onto Mill Road. He killed the headlights a quarter mile from property, letting the truck roll to a silent stop. The junkyard loomed ahead, a graveyard of shadows where chain-link fencing sagged under decades of neglect. Carlos slipped through a gap in the fence, his boots crunching on broken glass. The air smelled of rust and something sharper, gasoline. His pulse hammered as shapes resolved in the darkness. The skeletal remains of cars, their frames picked clean by time and scavengers. A flicker of movement near the old office trailer. Earl materialized in the shadows like a specter, his coveralls blending into the night. "Took you long enough." He spat a stream of tobacco into the dirt. "Vance's boys been through here twice already today." Carlos kept his distance, hand hovering near the bat in his waistband. What's so important it couldn't wait until morning? Earl's grin was a slash of yellow in the gloom. Mornings when they'll come for real, with papers and cops in their pockets. He turned, gesturing for Carlos to follow. Hector left you more than dirt and old coins, boy. They picked their way through the junkyard, past mountains of scrap metal glittering under the moonlight. Earl stopped before a shipping container half buried in weeds, its surface pockmarked with rust. This here's the real treasure. Earl produced his own key, fitting into the padlock. The hinges screamed as the door swung open. Carlos's breath caught. Neat rows of classic cars sat under dusty tarps, their shapes unmistakable even in the dark. Earl yanked off a cover, revealing the gleaming curves of the 1957 Corvette from Hector's photograph. Only this one wasn't black and white. It was candy apple red, its chrome bumpers reflecting the moonlight like liquid silver. Hector didn't just collect cars, Earl muttered, moving down the line. He collected investments. More tarps came off. A 69 Camaro SS, a 32 Ford Coupe, a 71 Hemi Cuda. Buried them back here when the county tried to seize the land for back taxes. Smart bastard. Carlos ran a hand over the Corvette's flawless hood. These are worth millions, Earl finished, especially now. But that ain't even the best part. He kicked aside debris to reveal a hatch in the container floor. Hector's real insurance policy. The underground chamber stank of oil and damp concrete. Earl flicked a switch, and bare bulbs flickered to life, revealing filing cabinets and a massive safe. Land deeds, Earl said, slapping a cabinet. Hector bought up every struggling property around here in the 80s. Got nearly 200 acres now, all tied up in shell companies. He spun the safe dial. And this? The safe door groaned open. Inside lay stacks of bound documents and a single black ledger. Earl tossed it to Carlos. Proof Vance Energy's been stealing oil for years. Siphoned right out of Hector's land through illegal lateral drills. Earl's eyes gleamed. Enough to put that bastard Vance away for life. Carlos's hands trembled as he flipped through pages of coordinates, dates, and payments to silent partners. This wasn't just wealth. It was a weapon. A distant engine growled. Earl snapped off the lights. They're early. Tires crunched gravel out by the road. Carlos shoved a ledger into his jacket as Earl pressed a pistol into his hand. Back ways through them crushed cars. Earl hissed. Run fast, run quiet. And Carlos? The old man's grin was feral in the dark. Welcome to the war. The first blood. The pistol felt foreign in Carlos's grip, its weight both terrifying and reassuring as he crouched behind a gutted Cadillac. Flashlight beams cut through the junkyard like prison searchlights, illuminating swirling dust and rusted metal. Heavy footsteps crunched closer. Check the container. A voice growled. Vance's bodyguard. Carlos held his breath as shadows moved toward Hector's hidden treasure. He had seconds to decide. Fight or flee. The ledger in his jacket seemed to burn against his ribs, its secrets more valuable than all the classic cars combined. Earl's hand clamped onto his shoulder. The old man pointed toward a narrow gap between two stacks of crushed sedans, then mouthed, Go. Carlos hesitated. Earl shook his head fiercely and shoved him forward just as the shipping container's doors screeched open. What the hell? Gunfire erupted. Carlos didn't look back. He dove through the gap, the ledger clutched tight as he scrambled through the junkyard's labyrinth. Shouts echoed behind him. Then another volley of shots, Earl's pistol answering. A bullet whined off the fender near Carlos's head. He zigzagged through the carcasses of old trucks, his lungs burning. The fence was just ahead, its chain links glinting. A hand grabbed his ankle. Carlos crashed face first into the dirt, the ledger skidding away. He rolled over to see a hulking figure looming above him. Not the bodyguard, but a new player. The man's nose was a flattened ruin, his knuckles tattooed with faded prison ink. Vance wants that book, the enforcer snarled, raising a tire iron. Carlos kicked upward, his boot connected with the man's knee. Something cracked. The enforcer howled, swinging the tire iron wildly. It grazed Carlos's temple, sending white-hot pain through his skull. Blinking through blood, Carlos grabbed the nearest weapon, a broken axle shaft. He swung blindly. The crunch of bone was sickening. The enforcer dropped, clutching his shattered jaw. Carlos snatched the ledger and lunged for fence. He was halfway up when headlights flooded the junkyard. "Stop him." Vance's voice raw with fury. Carlos vaulted over, landing hard on the other side. He sprinted toward the tree line as bullets chewed up the dirt around him. Branches whipped his face as he plunged into the woods, the sounds of pursuit fading behind him. 20 minutes later, he staggered onto a back road, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The motel was miles away. No phone, no transportation. And Carlos swallowed bile. He'd seen the muzzle flashes in the dark, heard the final shot that wasn't answered. A pair of headlights appeared over the hill. Carlos tensed, ready to dive back into brush, until he recognized the dented blue hood of Maria's cousin's old Buick. Maria leaned out the window, her face pale. "Get in." The car hadn't even stopped moving when Carlos yanked the door open. Maria hit the gas before he fully closed it, the Buick fishtailing onto the road. "Earl?" she asked, though her eyes already held the awful truth. Carlos shook his head, pressing the ledger between them like a holy relic. "We need to get to Houston. Tonight." Maria's knuckles whitened on the wheel. "What happened back there?" Carlos touched his bleeding temple, watching the junkyard flames rise in the rear-view mirror. Vance was covering his tracks. "The war started," he said quietly, and in the ledger's pages, he'd found the ammunition to win it. The Devil's Ledger. Dawn found him 300 miles south of Rustboro, the Houston skyline, rising like a mirage through the Buick's cracked windshield. Maria drove with a steady focus of someone who'd spent all night running from ghosts, her eyes fixed on the GPS directing them to the law offices of Hartman and Pierce. Carlos cradled the ledger in his lap, its cracked leather binding rough under his fingertips. Every few minutes, he'd touch the bandage on his temple, the wound throbbing in time with his heartbeat. The motel clerk had stitched it up in exchange for 2 of Hector's gold coins, no questions asked. "You should rest," Maria murmured, glancing at him. Carlos shook his head, flipping open the ledger again. The pages were a maze of coordinates, dates, and coded entries, but one pattern was clear. Vance Energy had been systematically stealing oil from Hector's land for over a decade. Siphon lines drilled at angles to bypass property markers, bribes to county inspectors, even a list of accidents arranged for holdout landowners. The last entry made his blood run cold. Mendez inheritance secured. Begin Phase 3 extraction. Cleanup crew on standby. Dated 2 days after Hector's death. Maria parallel parked outside a gleaming high-rise. "This is it." Her voice wavered slightly. "You sure about these lawyers?" Carlos tucked the ledger into a Walmart bag, Houston's version of a disguise. They're the only ones who've beaten Vance before. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending to another world. The receptionist's manicured nails clicked across a marble desk as she examined their borrowed clothes and road-weary faces. "Do you have an appointment with Mr. Hartman?" Carlos set the Walmart bag on her desk. "Tell him Hector Valdez sent us." Jonathan Hartman looked like a man who charged $1,000 just to say hello. His tailored suit probably cost more than Carlos made in 6 months, but his handshake was firm, his eyes sharp as they scanned the ledger's pages. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, flipping to a map of drilling sites. "This isn't just theft. It's industrial-scale fraud." He looked up at Carlos. "You understand what this means? With these coordinates, we can prove Vance drilled laterally under your property. The fines alone—" "I don't want fines," Carlos interrupted. "I want Vance in prison." Hartman steepled his fingers. "Then we'll need to move fast. Once Vance realizes you have this, he'll—" The office lights flickered. A muffled curse came from the reception area. Hartman stood just as his assistant burst in, her face ashen. "Sir, the building security system just went down. The cameras, too." Carlos was already pulling Maria toward the emergency exit. "They're here." The stairwell echoed with their frantic footsteps. Somewhere below, a door crashed open, boots on concrete. "Mendez." A voice echoed up the stairwell. "You're a dead man walking." Hartman yanked them onto the 37th floor. This way. They sprinted through a maze of cubicles, the lawyer typing frantically on his phone. My paralegals meeting us in the garage with glass shattered behind them. Carlos turned to see two men in tactical gear smashing through a fire exit. Not Vance's usual muscle. These are professionals, their movements crisp and coordinated. Hartman shoved a key card into Maria's hand. Silver Lexus in spot 14B. Go! He turned to face the approaching men, his suit jacket flaring open to reveal a holstered pistol. I'll hold them off. The last Carlos saw before the elevator doors closed was Hartman squaring his shoulders, the ledger's pages clutched in one hand like a battle standard. The Lexus peeled out of the garage just as the first gunshots echoed from above. Maria drove like a woman possessed, weaving through downtown traffic. Where now? She gasped. Carlos checked Hartman's last text. Asterisk safe house, 1742 Coral Lane. Backup copies made. Asterisk. He exhaled in relief. The evidence was out of Vance's reach. Then his phone buzzed with an unknown number. The attached photo made his stomach drop. A grainy security camera image of their motel room in Rustboro. The safe hung open, empty. The message read, "Your lawyer talks when he bleeds. How about your wife?" Maria saw his expression. What is it? Carlos deleted the message and gripped her hand. We're not running anymore. Somewhere in the city, a siren wailed. The hunt had begun in earnest. The reckoning. The abandoned Vance Energy facility loomed like a graveyard of steel under the pale moonlight. Carlos killed the Bronco's engine a mile out, approaching on foot through the skeletal remains of derrick equipment. The industrial park was eerily silent. The only sound the crunch of gravel under his boots and the distant cry of a night bird. His fingers brushed the cold metal of Earl's pistol tucked into his waistband. 3 bullets left. Not much, but enough. A single floodlight illuminated the main warehouse, its rolling door partially raised. Carlos crouched beside a stack of rusted pipes, scanning for movement. Too quiet. Too easy. This was absolutely a trap. But Hector deserved this. Earl deserved this. Carlos took a steadying breath and stepped into the light. Took you long enough. Robert Vance's voice echoed through the cavernous space as he emerged from the shadows, flanked by 4 armed men. The CEO looked immaculate as always in a tailored overcoat, his polished shoes gleaming. In his gloved hands, he carried a simple wooden box. I expected you'd bring the ledger, Vance sighed, shaking his head. No matter. We'll find your wife soon enough. Carlos kept his hand near his weapon. You said you'd tell me about Hector. Vance smiled, setting the box on an oil drum and flipping the lid open. Inside lay a single rusted drill bit stained with dark patches. Recognize this? Your uncle fought like a wildcat when my men came to persuade him about the mineral rights. Took 3 bullets before he went down. He picked up the bit, running a finger along its edge. We used this to make sure he never talked. Rage blurred Carlos's vision. He'd known, but hearing it unleashed something primal. Vance continued. Funny thing about oil, Mendez. It brings out the worst in men. He nodded to his guards. Kill him. Make it messy. The first gunman raised his weapon, just as the warehouse doors exploded inward. Shots rang out from multiple directions. Vance's men dropped like sacks of grain as armored figures swarmed the building, FBI jackets flashing in the floodlights. Maria stood in the doorway, Hartman at her side, the ledger clutched in her hands. Vance lunged for Carlos, the drill bit flashing. They crashed onto the concrete, Vance's expensive cologne mixing with the scent of oil and sweat. The bit grazed Carlos's cheek before he grabbed Vance's wrist and twisted until bone snapped. The CEO screamed, but Carlos wasn't done. He drove his knee into Vance's gut, flipping him onto his back. The drill bit hovered over Vance's left eye. For Hector, Carlos growled. Carlos? Maria's voice cut through the red haze. He hesitated. Vance whimpered beneath him. Suddenly small, pathetic, Carlos stood, tossing the bit aside as FBI agents swarmed Vance. Rot in hell. Epilogue, 3 months later. The morning sun glittered off the new sign at the Valdez Energy headquarters. a thriving company built on reclaimed land and justice. Carlos adjusted his tie, still uncomfortable in suits, as Maria unlocked the doors to their new free medical clinic across town. The Vance Energy scandal had rocked the state. Federal indictments, millions in reparations, and Hector's classic car collection auctioned for enough to fund scholarships for every kid in Rustboro. As reporters snapped photos of the ribbon cutting, Carlos spotted an old familiar face in the crowd, Earl Jenkins, leaning on a cane but very much alive, winking as he toasted with a flask. Some ghosts, it seemed, weren't ready to rest. Maria squeezed Carlos's hand as the applause swelled. The road had been paved with blood and oil, but they'd walked it together. And the future? It was finally theirs. Carlos's story proves that even the darkest nights end with dawn. What battles are you fighting today? Let us know in the comments. And if this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life tales of triumph against all odds.